So thank you for taking the time out this morning to be able to do this. And I certainly hope it's going to be beneficial for you and for our community. We are recording this, so we'll be able to share this with folks that were not here. And I know the media has been invited and will be here in and out. I know some of them throughout the day. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to really accomplish two things. Number one, the goal is, James Lima will, I'll introduce him in a second to start first, is to talk about some of the work that alongside Baptist Hospital, who has also partnered with the city to bring James back here. We're very appreciative for that. Where we've been ultimately. That you'll see a lot of the work James has done alongside Baptist, and talking with, I know as I've talked about this day with some of you, said, oh yeah, I remember talking with James and his team. We wanted to make sure that before we jump to what could be here in terms of what the city's involvement may be or what the future is, that we not forget the work that has taken place, because there has been a lot of robust community engagement and expertise that has looked at this property. So James will talk a little bit about that, what has taken place, and maybe if there were questions still to remain to be answered, things that we should examine, things that have changed in the last couple of years. But we didn't want to jump to any kind of conclusion without taking all of that great information and work that Baptist and James has done. And then second, we'll have Jerry from Bayview District Foundation really talk about potential of what right looks like. This is an organization, Bayview District Foundation, who has accomplished an amazing thing. I was able to have the opportunity to go tour it. And as you'll see, I'll let the data and the amazing progress they've had over the last 15 years speak for itself when he presents. But it was really the beginning of what we're kind of calling a visioning process. And I've joked with Jen and many of you in here is, when you're talking about property that the city doesn't control, you don't go the right mode of when you're supposed to start visioning what the city should do with it. I very much appreciate as we've continued to work through those details, that my joke has been, well, maybe it's right around now-ish that we should start talking about what we do want to do with the property. If we're able to make all this happen, and if our delegation and all the people of the city, the county that need to come together to make this work. So again, thank you guys so much for being here. And I will introduce quickly James Lima. James is the president of real estate and economic advisory firm James Lima Planning and Development, which helps lead planning and implementation of transformative downtown investments and other urban revitalization projects throughout North America. James's work in center cities spans 4 decades and has focused on equitable economic development, affordable housing production, and unlocking real estate and economic value through great placemaking. James is a co-author with the Urban Land Institute of The Case for Open Space, Why the Real Estate Industry Should Invest in Parks and Open Spaces, and Placemaking as an Economic Engine for All, the Routledge Handbook of Placemaking. Previously, James served as the NYC Affordable Housing and Economic Development Official, and later was appointed by then New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg as founding president of Governor's Island in New York Harbor. So with that, I'll introduce James Lima. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
What a beautiful facility this is. You're a very blessed community to have so many great resources. It's great to be back in Pensacola. Jen Grove, thank you for being such a great collaborator on a project that started in a very weird time, right? We were in lockdown, and we're thinking about doing a whole bunch of, in-person public meetings, and then, just COVID just kept complicating everything. So, I'm going to talk about a process where we got very substantial feedback from a big group of area residents through surveys, through steering committee, through one-on-one conversations to really inform what might be possible as Baptist moved to its new home. I would start by just saying that there's a lot of reason to be hopeful about the future of this site. One, because there are so many great examples to look to all over the country for successful public-private partnerships. And by that I mean the coming together in collaboration between government, institutions, private owners, and philanthropic communities around your aligned and shared values. So we could get caught up into a lot of the specific actions and tactics, but I think it's helpful today to focus on shared objectives and goals for outcomes, but also to the extent that those outcomes really reflect your shared values. Because I think at the end of the day, no matter whatever disagreements there may be about how we're going about some of this, there's a greater alignment of interests that I think we may even know about wanting a quality of life for everyone, about having greater and more equitable access to economic opportunity for everyone, about having clean and safe neighborhoods, and about having places of community and connection that honor our specific heritage of our place. And so when we talk about placemaking, it's also thinking about placekeeping and really honoring what is very special and unique about Pensacola and about this neighborhood and the community and this community history. Baptist was very committed and determined at the beginning to honor that history and to acknowledge that it's not going anywhere. Like it may be moving, but it's very much a leader and a civic citizen. And so it was really important to think about the legacy of what is left behind and how to set a foundation for others to sort of take it to the next level. So that's a little bit of context of how we came into this project and to think about it. So I'll walk a little bit through, first just a little bit about how our firm approaches these kinds of projects, and then what our process was like, and then some of the what we call guiding principles for the project, and we'll open up for discussion. And I have a fair number of slides, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. So we focus on this. I usually do work with a soundtrack, so wasn't going to be my first tune, but it's good notes. We try to measure and quantify the economic value of investing in place. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but this is kind of our touchdown. So across all of our work, it's really about, no matter where we work, it's really about better connecting the assets you already have to one another. So how can we create better mobility and access and connections for the neighborhood through creative transit, bike lanes, and other connections to the job center of downtown and other hubs. How do we create more vibrant communities? For us, that means more mix of uses and more affordability and price points for housing choices, quality housing choices, but also affordable space for small business entrepreneurs of all sorts, affordable space for arts and culture, for institutional uses, again, places of community and connection, community facilities. Unlocking real estate value by placemaking through infrastructure investments, through mobility and transit connections, creates more real estate value, not simply for the sake of creating real estate value, but to then capture some of that value, to be very intentional about that, and redirect some of that value through these financing mechanisms to do the thing that sometimes government just isn't built to do or to pay for, or that the private market isn't doing on its own. So at a district scale, when you're thinking about something at a scale like this, there is an opportunity to sort of think about a whole economic system and other systems where you're internally cross-subsidizing and making things possible in trade. In a way, there's an economy within the district that's possible. Thanks. Next slide. So thinking about investing in great places, one of the things that we helped author was a treatise that showed the data on significant value creation, but also the public and private benefits of the real estate industry and ownership community investing in both the creation of and the ongoing maintenance of parks and open space. There's a huge value creation opportunity, and we show a whole bunch of synergies for parks and open spaces and great places, and that can also include great streets and waterfronts. and the connection that has to wellness, to equity objectives, to recreation, of course, but also to workforce and job creation, to talent attraction, to boosting tourism, value premiums for sure, but also stimulating new development, and all the sort of economic benefits that come with those. There's another book that I highly recommend called Palaces for the People, and it's about social infrastructure. And it starts with an example in Chicago of a heat wave where two identical communities, relatively low income, suffered in a heat wave completely differently. One had very strong social cohesion with libraries and community centers and places of community connection. People were checking in on each other. There was a kind of a built environment where it was possible to stay connected as a community. The other one was very fractured, lots of vacant lots, no sense of connection, no social glue. The social infrastructure wasn't there. In the latter, there were very substantial, like dozens of fatalities, mostly elderly, but others in this severe heat wave. In the other community, there were no deaths, and in otherwise identical communities. So how can our social infrastructure be a force of resilience and sustainability that's really key to both equity, but also our strength as communities? So one of the great examples is in Indianapolis, a fairly simple bicycle and pedestrian trail that runs through downtown. It's called the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. The total assessed value of properties around the Cultural Trail rose 148% between 2008 and 2014, and the trail opened at the tail end of that period. So they stimulate this increase in market demand for proximity to the experience of what's happening in those open spaces. So we want to be thinking about how to create great experiences of connection and community, but also be mindful of that acceleration of value as a cause for needing to plan holistically and avoid unintended negative consequences of economic revitalization. Next. So for a project that we proposed for a 100-acre former GM stamping plant on the other side of downtown Indy across the White River, we proposed extending the Indy Cultural Trail, which is shown in blue, and then that green is our kind of graphic representation of the radiating value of proximity to this new proposed extension of the Cultural Trail, which would tie you back into the core of downtown Indianapolis. So in an area that really didn't have much market demand and where financing was very difficult, bringing the Cultural Trail in was a stimulative effect, which in some cases could raise achievable rental rates by $3, $4, $5 a foot. In other words, bridging the gap between what's infeasible economically and what might be feasible. So value creation as a way of creating the kind of gap financing, if you will, or creating feasibility that doesn't exist today. Next. We were so proud to work with our frequent collaborators at Scape Landscape Architects here in Pensacola on the concept plan for your downtown waterfront, including Bruce Beach. And for us, Bruce Beach is a reminder of how important our cultural landscapes and our cultural heritages to place. And so really thinking about place, not just from an economic standpoint, but as a placekeeper. And again, as a really important way for communities to say what's important to you and what has happened here, and how is that memory and the dignity and the history sort of retain a really important presence in place. So thinking about this as also a destination at the far end of Main Street that will eventually create much more of a corridor to stroll and expand the economic vitality of downtown. Thanks. So I'm going to go through the process, and this is really now an excerpt from work that we completed in January 2022. So Baptist started out well before we began with an assessment of their facilities to see what the conditions were of the buildings that they would be vacating. They announced their new facility in which they moved to. Right? They started a community advisory council And then we came along and started a development framework analysis for the campus, including some community and stakeholder engagement. And then started working specifically with what was called a special committee. And many of you served on that, so thank you for all the time you committed to that discussion. We finished our work in January 2022, and Baptist issued a development offering for the campus, and here we are. Next. So our process included a few things. I mentioned a community survey, which we'll review. We did a market analysis to see what the potential was for reuse on the site. We looked at national case studies and best practices. We worked closely with the special committee, which was very engaged and I think broadly representative, and brought a lot of divergent viewpoints to the discussion on a regular basis. We did one-on-one stakeholder interviews with government, private sector, and communities, developers, civic communities, foundations, and others. And we looked at existing conditions reports. And ultimately, that formed the basis for what we call a framework plan, development framework. Thanks. So there are three drivers for the future of the campus. First, Baptist is the owner. They've got a core mission to deliver quality health services, and that stay focused on their core mission and continue to do what's in their fiduciary responsibility and what is most aligned with their mission. And then we had to understand, well, what would the private market do? What is it interested in? What does it want? And how can it support this future proposed adaptive reuse? And then most important for the conversation of this process was, what does the community most want and need? And so it was a process to continue to have that discussion. So Baptist issued a survey and to an extensive area surrounding the site and received, I believe, 160 responses, which is a great response, a substantive set of answers to a series of questions about what they envision future uses on the campus could be and how it might benefit them, their family, and the broader community. You can see overwhelmingly that number one concern was continued healthcare services for the community. And then a series of responses that really focus on jobs, economic opportunity, education, training, social services, with housing still in a top five, but behind economic opportunity and healthcare, which is probably not surprising and reflective of kind of long-standing inequity in the area. Parks and open space, food, retail, better roads and signs, all made so at that top of the list. So we summarized kind of a snapshot early in our process to say, like, what are the market realities of what we're looking at? It's a challenging market from a real estate perspective, based on what it costs to build there. Clearly demolition is a concern, but the cost today, as everyone knows, of contractor work is very high relative to the rents that can be achieved. The achievable market rents just haven't kept up with the extraordinary acceleration in construction costs. For developers, that revenue gap relates to the way they see the other choices they have of where to invest, right? So downtown or other parts of the city, it's like, how does West Moreno compete, and what is that revenue gap, and how do we attract somebody and say, well, this needs to get on your short list of potential investment opportunities. And then gap financing, does it exist? In public-private partnerships all over the country, especially for large-scale projects, they're almost never just privately financed. I know there are exceptions, but it's almost always the case that government has a role in providing infrastructure, transit, obviously core municipal services, but there's often a role where government both needs to and sometimes wants to participate through its bonding authority, its financial incentive programs, its other economic stimulative programs that vary from municipality to county to state, and can be important layers of offsetting risk in development. And then implementing the development framework to actually implement, and this is really a great juncture for a conversation today, is where's the political and community support? Is there investment possible in site clearance for infrastructure upgrades and new placemaking and better transportation access? Those are all critical to move forward. And it was pretty clear that residential development was the most financially feasible for the district compared to commercial, office, retail, and hotel. There's some viability for industrial, but there wasn't a strong interest in making this a more industrial area. You have pretty healthy and robust industrial zones elsewhere. So reimagining the campus, again, this just, for our point of view, is like, what's the role of each of the parties here? What can the community do? What can the private market do? What can government do? What can Baptist, the owner, do? So the community wants to achieve its community and economic development priorities where possible. The private market, ultimately can purchase the property or have a land disposition agreement, which might be a ground lease, and secure the entitlements, whatever public approvals are needed, and raise the capital needed and bring its development expertise to the table. Again, government can offer subsidy, incentives, direct investment in amenities and infrastructure, and really continue to be a catalyst to advance the project. Again, Baptist core mission is not being a real estate developer. They never came into this wanting to be the kind of overall redeveloper of this property. They said, let's find a responsible party or parties that can fulfill the mission, that reflect the shared values of what this can be, and has invested significantly in a process for stakeholder engagement and creating this development framework and some guiding principles. So guiding principles and development framework. These are sort of outlined. Next. So what they are and what they aren't. The guiding principles were really meant to be a set of general recommendations on the spatial and programmatic configuration of what's possible. They're developed based on economic and market analysis, community input, and placemaking potential, and our policy review, regulatory review. And we thought that Baptist could use the guiding principles to engage government and other partners and developers during the disposition process to say, look, there's an opportunity here, but you have to do it within these broad parameters. What it's not are prescriptive final design guidelines or kind of highly defined details of what is and isn't possible. It left a lot of leeway and flexibility for developers and others to bring their own insights and create teams. Developers who come to agreement with Baptist ultimately or eventual owner would determine the details of the project. And that's an acknowledgement that there's a whole bunch of unknown factors, both about the site itself, but also the future markets. Anything this scale is going to get built over a fairly long period of time, and markets are going to continue to evolve and change. And by no means did this represent as a set of guiding principles like the last chance the community would have to have a voice, right? So it's not a final stage of community input. I mean, every time I just see the image of these heritage oaks, these are on the site today. We walked the site and said, this is already a spectacular park that just happens to have some asphalt that cars are parked on, and kudos to Baptist for being careful stewards all these years for not cutting communities down. It's extraordinary. And maybe you all are close to it and see this all the time, but for somebody from away to come here and see something this just doesn't exist in that many places. It's very, very special. So we immediately gravitated to this idea of creating that social infrastructure, the place of community connection, of particularly at that moment in the pandemic, like we never wanted to be more together, and yet we were told not to be, right? So it was also a moment where all over the world we learned the value of open space, of being together but having a little distance, of being outdoors together and having connection to nature. So this was a kind of an easy one to define as an early guiding principle. Next. And then it turns out, well, this already was and has been a very important place of community connection. The Cuprian House was a really important part of an early entertainment kind of district that was very family friendly. Next slide. And thank you from the Historical Society for all these amazing historical images. Next. The racing, the entertainment that used to happen here. Places of community and connection, civic life, and just breathing room in just an absolutely beautiful and very special and distinctly Pensacola environment. And so there's some things to fix, but as projects go, this is a pretty, I would say this is what you call low-hanging fruit, right? As an opportunity to protect and secure the future of the public realm first. And we can debate what the eventual redevelopment happens on the parcels that are available for redevelopment, but if we get a public realm framework right, of parks and great streets, that's the most important thing. Because that's where you're all going to live together and connect together. And that becomes the organizer of where private development wants to be. So if we think about the great streets that we live on, shop on, work on, visit, they're organized around great places. You know, a great store might be along a really amazing boulevard, or a great hotel or memorable place you visited might be along a great waterfront esplanade. It's the public realm that's the very special place, so let's focus on creating those. So we led with the public sector supporting the creation of a new park. And the idea is the government's generally good at using its ability to raise capital funding to create public open space and parks. And so this, again, no magic to the geographic boundary of this, but this was roughly where this concentration of heritage oaks was on the site that was potentially defining and organizing the next wave of density redevelopment. And the Cuprian House might become a community-based use of some sort. Again, this is 2 years ago. Next. And then reconnecting streets. So over time, this became a little bit of a super block, right? So a lot of the historic connectors got disconnected. And so just taking the time to reconnect streets to create more walkable, more standard Pensacola neighborhood grid of streets where possible. Over time, the super block at the middle could potentially have streets running through it as well that would allow Mallory to continue, but that might be something that the eventual redeveloper of the site could decide to do or not do. Next. And then another guiding principle, and again, this is where Baptist was very clear. They wanted to make sure that the eventual plan reaffirmed what we heard in the survey, what they knew to be true, which was that everyone really cares about making sure that there are solutions for healthcare going forward that meet the needs of this neighborhood and the surrounding area. And so what might that look like? And how does that land within the overall development plan? But also education and training are key community priorities. And so how could a school anchor, another community facility, next slide, workforce training, that again provides greater community resident opportunities for job and career advancement, for skills building, and to really think about the interrelationship between healthcare, education, career pathways, and citywide opportunities for economic development. And so at the time, again, 2 years ago, we identified a parcel along Moreno that would repurpose an existing facility as a potential healthcare education facility along what we consider the most civic street, be Moreno, which we'll talk more about. And then we like to propose elements of a master plan that really build from a kit of parts that reflect what's working well in your community And this was an example of a quality housing developer who is very skilled at doing multifamily, mixed income, mixed use projects in your immediate neighborhood that can address workforce needs and mixed income housing needs. And so just finding the examples where like your state finance folks, your county housing finance authority, your local housing officials have already been working together on projects and products like this that are meeting some of the greatest housing needs, and that they're executing well. The most important thing in my view, having worked in affordable housing for 35 years, is getting agreement and commitments around quality. There's a bias everywhere against affordable housing, and in my experience that stems from people's experience with projects built in the 60s and 70s that were 100% low income, federally funded, poorly designed, poorly built, and poorly operated and maintained. Well, that's kind of a recipe for creating something that just isn't a very good anchor of a neighborhood. And what we know now and what we see everywhere is there's a commitment to quality across the board, across the whole spectrum of housing choices and housing affordability that is additive to community experience. So if we design workforce housing in a quality way, build with quality materials, and are willing to pay for those quality, durable materials, and continue to build community capacity to have community-based not-for-profit housing providers be part of your affordable housing delivery system, and continue to get private developers to commit to housing quality, which you'll hear more about today. We can keep building things that are assets in the community that address affordability as well. Thanks. So we looked at a combination of multifamily, mixed income, which could be some market and some affordable in one multifamily building, and then what we're calling workforce housing, which might be 100% affordable, but at a middle market that might address the needs of like a double income household that might be making $80,000 to $100,000, but really don't have a lot of choices in the current market. So looking at multifamily, but with a couple of options that might include some market rate and some workforce. And then we also looked at the fact that it's a largely low density neighborhood, and this is a big site, so we thought the density made most sense around the civic space, the primary park, and along Moreno, and that the density would sort of diminish as you moved away from that into the more low-density residential neighborhood. So market rate single-family homes and townhouses, but also single-family homes and townhouses that might be income restricted for workforce housing, where there are housing finance products for that as well. So this area, which is mostly where a lot of the demolition is required, we were proposing for single-family and townhouse, largely market rate development. Again, there's no magic to this. We just thought there needs to be a balance between what is subsidized and what can be put out in the private market. This was a snapshot in time. And then the next slide shows north of that, that similarly relatively low income, but income restricted and really focused more on a workforce target market. Again, where the private market isn't really responding to those needs and where government really hasn't been providing so much of that. And then, you have beloved family restaurants and other small business retail that have come and gone, but they're very much a part of the memory of people's experience in and around Baptist. And so how do we create new active ground floor uses that create more opportunities for BIPOC and women-owned businesses that are available to young entrepreneurs who want to be in the neighborhood, but can provide some essential services that maybe right now are not available. The creation of some housing density on the site, and I think in total we created over 600 new housing units, which would be well over 1,000 new people living in the general area, would be another strong impetus to support small businesses in the neighborhood and create an even bigger customer base. Next. So we proposed this purple L shape as sort of civic uses, both a great bakery that you come to on a Saturday morning, and that's your thing. You come to the park, you go to this bakery, you go to the community center, maybe you go for some exercise. You've got this healthcare related service along Moreno, and that Moreno is this rebuilt, lush, canopied street that's got bioswales and is a kind of a high performance new shared street, but that the ground floor along Moreno and the park feels very civic and community oriented, along like the best places in Pensacola where you meet your fellow members of the community. And then really thinking about, just go back for 1 second to the last one. It was really at this moment, in thinking about that I think I made the crazy suggestion to Jen. It was like, maybe you could sell the whole site to the city. Which, 2 years ago was kind of a crazy idea, because there really wasn't an appetite by the city to get involved in this. But the reason I said that is that to do what I've just described takes somebody being the project manager and somebody to have a commitment to the program and the plan and the values, and to have the authority and the financial capability to pull that off, and the ability to negotiate public-private partnership deals. So it's using federal economic development agency money for a workforce training center. It's using other grant monies for high performance infrastructure that communities are getting all over the country. It's being the repository of some of those sources of funding from other levels of government, not from the city, and deploying them here in really beneficial ways that create value for the real estate developers for sure, but also, and first and foremost, for the community. And allow you to have a more activated and dynamic experience in that zone. So next slide is really about the square and the potential to redevelop this over time. In some ways, if you get that circle right and the civic life and the experience right, you can kind of let the rest of that be a little bit more flexible while it becomes, and it can just be a lot more like a typical residential development here, which is single family, maybe some townhouses. But thinking about how to build that out and to make sure that there's one place that feels like the memory and the identity and the social center of your place. So the framework makes the reimagination of the site more feasible in a few ways. First of all, the allocation of the uses and typologies we talked about 2 years ago reflected the real estate financial feasibility that seemed most compelling. The placemaking and amenities, parks, road services would absolutely generate market demand that does not exist today. And the framework, the shared vision and consensus around a vision lowers the risk profile from the developer investment community. If I'm thinking about where I want to bring my investment, I need to have a gut check about whether the execution risk is high or low. And if I come into a place where there's both a shared and compelling vision for what you want your place to be, and there's the leadership, the political and community leadership behind that, I'm a lot more comfortable as a developer investor to say, oh, all right, this doesn't seem like it's going to go sideways. This seems like there's a lot of momentum in it. So that's really important for you as a community to get to that place, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you, to get to that place of having a shared vision and leadership to drive this. And then it all indicates the need for public funding. It just does. And that's the history of high quality, successful public-private partnerships in real estate development. Government always has an important role to play to take patient capital top loss risk where the private market doesn't have to do that. And then again, the market feasibility, community support, and partner contributions. All of this process, will always increase the momentum toward the redevelopment. And here we are today, coming out of a global pandemic and thinking about the opportunities for redevelopment in very constrained financing markets, but also at a time when the future of work and future of retail are all in flux and reimagining a lot of that. And people have never had more choices about where to live and work, which is a distinct advantage for a high quality of life city like Pensacola. So really thinking about how to have the quality housing choices here be a real asset for the way the city is embracing diverse workforce, addressing equity objectives, righting past inequities, and really moving to advance an overall quality of life and economic growth agenda. So finally, and thanks for being patient, slogging through this, the critical paths that we outlined 2 years ago still holds true today. Engage government as an implementation partner at all levels to think about how what you're trying to accomplish aligns with the granting criteria for other layers of government, and you are perfectly aligned in so many ways with every layer of government in that regard. Prepare the building demolition and site clearance. It's we would have all liked to have that demolition complete to solicit private developer interest. I know there's some interest in kind of revisiting whether any of the buildings on site might be adaptively reused, and that should be discussed. And then the developer outreach, solicitation, negotiation. Again, there was a preliminary solicitation. I think there's an opportunity now to clarify the vision and make sure that everyone's on the same page about what's your priority, and then how to sell that and identify opportunities. And we're going to hear from Jerry in a few moments about one scenario about how to pursue that. And then continue to encourage community participation and think about community benefit projects like community facility and the kinds of local retail uses that most meet your local needs. So I'll just leave you with what to me feels like the most compelling reason to move forward is to honor your place and to see the value in both that preservation, but also in the community process that got us where we're at today. Thank you for the time.
If you don't mind, James, if you guys had any questions, feel wanted to fire away.
Hi, Sam Young, Pensacola Habitat. We spoke virtually not too long ago, but two questions for you. One is, have you considered a community land trust strategy in the overall development of this project? And if so, where might that fit in? And two, how do you balance, you spoke about the mobile workforce and attracting folks from outside. How do you balance addressing the needs of the current residents versus attracting more residents that are going to eat up the housing that we develop versus addressing the issues at hand with trying to find affordable, attainable housing for the current residents of Greater Pensacola?
Did everybody hear the question? I should have handed you the mic. So first questions, have we considered the community land trust? We did talk 2 years ago about the potential of a community land trust where property is held in a common community trust. Often a private party or not-for-profit or individual homeowners could own the buildings, but the land stays in common ownership. Essentially, it takes the cost of that land out of the equation of housing costs, but also serves as an enforcement mechanism to retain affordability over time. I think the workforce housing component here could certainly fit into that, and a survey of the area to identify socially vulnerable housing that might be at risk if there's significant residential renter population that maybe wants to stay in place but is at risk. I think that kind of survey would be helpful to understand that. And the other question is how you meet the needs of locals versus, I guess, bringing in outsiders. Again, to me, it should not be a zero-sum game where we either take care of our own or we allow for economic expansion and economic reinvestment. And I know that sounds tricky, and it's super tricky. We have to be very intentional in economic development to identify where there is economic and social vulnerability so that we don't have unintended negative consequences of successful economic investment. And it's a really important part of the work that our firm does because we've seen again and again that unfortunately that does happen, that you do have people displaced when economic revitalization happens. The good news is there are lots of examples of where it's possible to avoid that happening. Community land trusts, working with national organizations like NeighborWorks America to provide grants and loans to vulnerable seniors who are still in single-family homes, for example. Home buyer training, just lots of examples of how to keep existing communities in place. And then building new affordable housing and having local community-based not-for-profits help with marketing so that we understand, like, when we do a lottery, like, who's getting these apartments or these houses, right? Like, how does that work? How does that process work? Having local representation that's capable and qualified and having, a role for the city and sort of providing oversight on that, that's a really critical thing citywide. So it should be possible to allow for change, and change is sometimes hard, but also being very intentional about working with the existing communities and community leadership. Any other questions?
George Osborne George Osborne with the Integral Group out of Atlanta. Question, the whole plan, I love your plan, the outlook of it, but it seems that the basic premise of it was built around the demolition is the primary concern. And my question is what type of actual assessments were done to see if the building could be reused? Because it seems 650,000 square feet that can be adapted, reused for those same components that you're talking about. Creates a town center kind of effect if you're able to reutilize some of the existing facilities. And within like the basement or the ground floor of the medical towers, it's 75 to 80,000 square feet. They can be easily converted into retail uses for the community. There's substantially less economic investment. And so if you put that 20 million that you're looking into for investment to tear it down into restructuring and readapt and reuse of the units, it would seem that you'd be able to utilize that money to incentivize those workforce development and market rate kind of housing programs. And our company, we've done probably $5 billion worth of these projects across the country, 40, 50 public-private partnerships, and we see this all the time. And the head of our design, we've had our people go in and actually look at the building, and actually our design engineers and professionals that were actually engaged by Baptists to build that portion, the last portions. They've given us a full report that it could be converted to adaptable reuse, and I think that's a better use of public funding as a way to kind of push this mission ahead. I just want to know how you came to this assessment, and was it a physical building assessment, or was it a financial assessment because of all the other issues surrounding it? Because I think those issues can be handled also.
It's a great question. Our firm's worked on multi-million square foot adaptive reuse of old military bases, and that's always our first instinct, is to recycle a building. There's nothing more sustainable and green than repurposing an existing building. And Jen Grove wants to speak to this, throw the mic to her, but we relied on a physical conditions survey that Baptist had commissioned recently before we were engaged, that indicated that there was very limited opportunity, if any, for adaptively reusing what was there. They had kind of reached their usable life, and so we didn't have the the charge to reassess that,
Yes.
nor the technical capabilities
That's
to
what I-
assess that.
that's what I feel.
So it became a starting point, though we did push back. There are a couple of buildings, a few interesting buildings there that we thought, yeah, these are absolutely, like, this building, could be repurposed for, like a gym or, a fitness facility. It's beyond my pay grade to know if that should be reopened, and if in fact there are opportunities. But for the experts who had been hired by Baptist to look at that, the answer was, sadly, these are not salvageable. But again,
Well, the reason I asked that because we had our structural engineer, 2 architects, mechanical engineers that actually were building that built those last phases of the hospital, that know the building. And the head of our design team took care of adaptive reuse at NAS for the last 25 years. So we understand that, how to do this and how it can be done. But I think that there's been, from the beginning, we've been talking with them for 8 months about pushing this together. And from the beginning, there's always been a predisposed assumption that you've got to take the building down. And I think that's just a bad use of public money. This is my 30 years experience in development.
Generally, in principle, I agree with you that if there's a way to adaptively reuse an existing building, it's going to be lower costs, and you're going to have more dollars to spread across the project. I don't know, again, it's a building by building assessment. Jen?
Yeah, Jen, sorry, James, thank you. The only other thing I'd add, and George, I know y'all are absolutely looking at that, we've had other developers since we went to the market who have said, ooh, we've done that before. We've renovated a 1950s hospital into apartments, and they brought their structural engineers, they brought the folks who actually did the work and worked on it for months looking at the potential for that, and ultimately earlier this year told us, given the condition of our facility, that would not be possible. We've never said it has to come down. We've said, what is the fastest path to this transformational opportunity that our community has? And everybody that had assessed the facilities at that time and since that time that has engaged with us has told us it's not possible. That doesn't mean it's not. That's just what we've been told thus far.
Well, I would have to disagree with that because I would have to disagree with that one point because we've had substantive discussions with Baptist, with your advisors, and we've emphatically told them that it can be reused, and we brought your architects and engineers that built the last phase of mechanical problems and the mechanical issues there that said that it can be done now. The biggest issue is how do you separate the mechanicals and the chiller systems.
Right, so this is a
Yes.
great discussion to continue. Yes.
Yeah, Steve Bean with the Pace Foundation. We also, we contracted with the hospital, and I heard the structure. We did look at some of the structure as well, and listen to the community, and your the feedback you provided us, James, as well. Back in 22, which is outstanding. And it just didn't seem, based on what everybody was saying, and as well as the structurals and information we had ascertained, that it was in the best interest to keep, repurposing a building of that height in that area, because I think it was more, it took away the community feel, the walkability of the area. That's what we felt when we, put our bids in and our design. So I hear what, another thought process is there, but you also have to be careful of kind of when you get into repurposing. In some cases, we've done it as well. We've done historic deals in lots of communities, and a lot of times they're great and they work wonders. But if it's not in the overall vision of the larger development, that also is a detriment. And I think that's what has to be considered. And I think that's what we considered and we heard from everyone, including your firm, which was extremely helpful in our kind of disseminating what would be the best possible use. And I think putting new development in there that's modern, and that brings up value within the greater community as you present in your slide, not trying to repurpose old buildings and make them look better.
Yeah, I guess the good news is that this is not a philosophical disagreement. It's either, the data is either going to tell us it's true
That's right.
or it's not true. So, the answer can be determined.
Yeah,
We just, it seems like we don't absolutely
a
know.
lot of environmental, just things you got to look at all together. There's a global perspective to that, you know, if we're, and the gentleman up front made a great point, what's the best use of monies, and that's, you know, that's definitely always a consideration as well.
In the back.
Lou Ray, a citizen. Do you envision an area, and maybe I missed it because I came a little late, an area in the plan where a medical clinic, emergency care, or routine services would be located?
Alex, can we go flip back to a site plan? Thanks. Yeah, we showed this large pink site at the south of Marina as a possible healthcare related
Thank you.
facility. I think that was always the goal.
Is that the building that was offered a community clinic? You said that they wouldn't do it because of the cost of rehab? And yet Baptist said it was committed to continue providing care on the facility, on that site.
I'm with Community Clinic in that space that we look at 2.6 acres. It, I think historically has needed some civil engineering to mitigate flooding in that area, which increased the cost of putting a health center there. I think we were quoted about $7.6 million to erect a building. And to the gentleman's point up front about rehabbing, I mean, there's new wings to the hospital that were added in the last couple of years. You know, to make a health clinic, you've already got kind of some space that could be quickly converted to exam rooms and a space. I think that would be much more cost effective if there's an opportunity to rehab some of the existing buildings and provide that, you know, medical clinic, being that's the primary request from the residents of the community.
I would further submit that the existing emergency room is most effectively converted to an emergent care center, because that was part of the plans that we were looking at. Because it's an existing facility, you've got to do practically very limited capital improvements to get it to operations.
Jim, I'm Gary LeBar, I'm representing UWF, so we can change the direction of the conversation. You mentioned or showed the survey information from the neighborhood, particular workforce development and education. Do you have any further insight? We can certainly talk offline about education. Is it K through 12? Is it pre-K? Is it postgraduate? Is it secular? Is it non-secular? Public, private? What's the interest of the members of the community in that regard?
Yeah, there may be others here who have more insight on that than I. It really wasn't part of what we looked at.
So following up on James's recommendations to us on next steps, one of those next steps was to engage with the various organizations in the community that provide the services that were both priorities from the neighborhood survey, which is residents within 1 mile of the campus, as well as the broader community stakeholder groups that we started engaging in 2019. Education and training was always one of the key desires. From the neighborhood resident survey, if you read through some of the other written comments, it was much more about workforce training. So in fact, Dr. Saunders was one of those partners we engaged, and she had worked with other post-secondary colleagues in the community to put together a little bit of a consortium where on the ground floor of one of the PACES buildings, the multi-family rental buildings, there would be a workforce training center similar to that Gateway facility that we had found through a national learning collaborative that we were looking at best practices for how to do this. And so there was the thought about bringing a workforce training center there that would not always be have UWF folks, sometimes would be Pensacola State College was involved, PCC was involved, I believe Georgetown as well. So a rotating training center based on quick to deliver certifications and skill sets for high skill, high wage opportunities in our community. Additionally, we had talked to, I don't think he's here, Marcus McBride at Career Source about job training services, and he wants to bring a satellite office to that location, both to provide the individuals, residents in the community, the opportunity to access the individual training accounts and funding for that sort of training, as well as all of the career preparation resources that they provide, but also to bring employment services closer to the concentration of businesses that we have downtown. Since that time, we've had a lot of folks, many in this room, talk about, wow, what about K through 8? The other component of education that we had actually looked at is that we have found the Center of Excellence in Miami. It is a hybrid, it's the only that I've been aware of, hybrid Head Start funded and market rate funded early childhood development center. It has incredible outcomes for all students. It is mixed income students there. And so I had reached out to Doug Brown, who leads Community Action Agency here, who takes the Head Start funding into our community, shared the model. He is very interested in bringing childcare facilities to the ground floor of the multifamily developments as well. So I would say then from cradle to career, I think is what is being discussed on the education front.
I would just add that, when we contracted to put the workforce and we carved out a special portion of commercial from discussions with you and the hospital, James and Jennifer, and to plan, when we do secure the necessary federal and state subsidies, to work with master developer and be malleable with that space and with the hospital and the community to say, how best do you want that space to adapt? And there was several discussions with the hospital about education and putting the school and clinics in those spots. So we're excited to figure out how best to employ that space.
Anyone from the local community who'd like to weigh in about what you'd like to see and where you think this needs to go?
So this area, if it was done correctly, it would be a bridge between our downtown to the west side. The entire area there now is becoming a food desert, it's becoming an education desert, and it will become a healthcare desert. In order for this to succeed and for continue to be a link to from downtown Pensacola to continue to the west, all those things have to be incorporated. And in order for this to be a neighborhood that is vibrant, that people want to be in, that it's a place where people can commute from there to downtown or to wherever it may be, it needs to have those things. And a conversation without at least K through 8 here, and at least with something to counter the food desert that is there now, I think will be a mistake.
Thank you for that. I do just want to note that this is my first presentation I've ever made where I'm looking at dolphins. It's pretty incredible. I'm not going to forget this one either.
They were not cheap to hire.
Y'all really pulled out all the stops. My hope for you is that, fast forward, when we look back on this, that Moreno is this national example of how communities can come together and do something that's very affirming for predominantly African American community that has really seen a lot of inequity over the years, and that is a place that honors the history of the place, that affirms the need to be intentional about having greater access to education, economic opportunity, health and wellness, and that it's a great place of community and coming together. That L shape of purple is workforce training and youth career pathway programs where 8th graders are starting to think about apprenticeships and internships and career options, where small BIPOC and women-owned businesses have opportunities in relatively low-cost spaces working within small business incentives programs, where the healthcare innovation is in partnership with the incredible resources you have here. But the street itself is a great shady, tree canopy, kind of hangout, cafe sort of life where we all just want to linger and connect. But it's also, it's modeling best practices for environmental stewardship and sustainability with bioswales and native plantings. And so it's infrastructure, but it's choreography of what's possible here. And it needs somebody to be very intentional about directing that and putting those pieces together. And that can happen over time. You're already on your way with the interest you've had in some of the mixed income and affordable housing. And I think there's a pathway there, but there's a real opportunity for Moreno and this idea of a new park to anchor something that has a very strong identity, and maybe you all come up with a neighborhood name that it's never really had. Right? So think about what that could be, let the neighborhood decide what it is.
Karen Manuel, resident of the city. I agree with your plan completely. I think it's a wonderful long-range plan. I think the elephant in the room, though, is that big orange square. And unless there can be a decision about demolition or repurposing, nothing around that is going to happen. And if the decision is demolition, then the question is, who's going to pay for it? And I don't think your Baptist is going to find a developer to either give that property away or sell it that's going to pay the cost of demolition. And I think it's going to take a partnership, including Baptist Hospital, to cover the cost of that demolition, if that's the decision.
Federal prosecutors are saying.
Okay. You talked about this area connecting with downtown. What is the path? Do you have a map of showing what that path would look like? A greenway, a bike, a walking path? Designated, just a designated, this is the path to the downtown?
It's been a couple of years, so I'm a little rusty, but one idea for sure was expanding bus service along Moreno, where there's already a stop. For that to be an important connector. And then I think there is kind of a larger opportunity for the north-south streets that have dedicated bikeways, greenways.
Those sort of grayed out buildings up there north over along to Lakeview this goes back when you were doing something with Lakeview. So was there discussion with them? Is there also a big player in this area?
Yeah, originally, we were looking at what were Lakeview properties north of Avery, and ultimately that was carved out as outside of our study area. But yes, in theory, over time, those might also be in play as a bigger opportunity for redevelopment.
So, to that point, I'm David Stafford. I'm here on behalf of the representative of Lakeview. So it was carved out, right, because of the disaffiliation that occurred during this process. But moving forward, there certainly are considerations with the consistency of what is happening and what will be happening on the Lakeview campus, and then against the plans for just to make sure they're consistent. So was that part of the consideration, or was it just sort of that might as well be just blocks of nothing?
We're glad to have the chance to tour your facilities and talk through this, and it was very helpful in thinking about this. But our thought was that the square, this kind of larger zone, was beneficial for everyone and really increased quality of life for staff and residents, and certainly also changed the real estate equation for you as well, and that those might evolve over time.
Well, I would just say, just moving forward, and I know, Mayor, that you've engaged, is just understanding that they're a critical partner in this area moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of points that have been brought up here today are extremely valid. The conversation about what to do with the main campus, the conversation about what happens along Marina Street. I think where we are today, I think it's important for context as an example. Today is not the final community engagement, just as James mentioned that this framework was not that. I think this is trying to really kind of reset our feet about where we are today versus where Baptist may have been a couple of years ago. And so, and again, the primary focus of why James is here is to kind of say, here's some of the work that we've done. And I told James last week, I said, that may be that we do a lot of this, half of this, none of this. That's not what's being discussed. What's being discussed is here's what we've heard from the community. Here is what has been investigated. Here are some ideas, and I think obviously there are some great ideas that his team have put together. But ultimately, I think where our primary focus is right now is to be able to afford to do something. And that's, I won't speak for Baptist, I'll certainly speak for me. That is our primary focus right now in this legislative session, to try to do the best that we can to do something. That no decision needs to be made on whether we demo or retrofit, because I agree, James put it best. This is a philosophical discussion about which one we do is really moot at this point, because at the end of the day, if there was a way to repurpose it that made sense within a grand master plan, why would we not consider that? So, we'll look at everything, but we have nothing to look at, and the city certainly doesn't have $18 million sitting around to start making those decisions. So we're trying to get in alignment with Baptist and lockstep about what would happen, contingent on us being able to get the funding. And as you can imagine, that's a complicated conversation. What if we get 2/3 of the money we think it will take? Do we deal with the main campus and phase 2 South Marina Street? What if we get 1/3 of the money? Now what, do we go try to get a master planner and try to look at other capital stack opportunity outside of the legislature? As you've heard Senator Bronson say, we are not expecting that the legislature is going to carry the full lift here. And so Baptist, the city, the county, and others are trying to talk about how we get there. So I don't want to make it sound like we're saying it's too early, because those conversations don't matter. They certainly do, and they certainly will. But where we sit today is we wanted to start getting brains and all these intelligent brains in development, in education, in healthcare, all in the same room to kind of set our feet about where we are today. And certainly James has done that. And then we'll take a break in a second and allow Jerry to kind of talk about just a conceptual plan on a similar size, similar acres of property, what they've been able to do. And I would qualify the same thing. It isn't necessarily that exactly what you'll hear from him is exactly what has to happen at Baptist. We are not there yet. But what I hope comes out of this today is all the people in the room and the decades and decades of experience in all of these different facets come with ideas and suggestions and concerns as we continue to narrate this with you and with the greater community. And that's why I said the reason this isn't a 300-person event is because we want to make sure that the folks in here who live and eat, sleep, and breathe these types of projects every day have the opportunity to get their wheels turning as we continue to engage the community. So thank you for that. And again, thank you for committing your morning and all of your time. I know we're all busy to being able to really getting an investment of your brain power collectively that will continue to narrate moving forward. We do have some water and cookies out here for you as your consolation prize. That's all we can afford to pay you. But let's just take all right, it's 9:45 now. We'll start back with Jerry at 10 o'clock. Is that okay? Thank you guys.